During what would later be known as the Foundation's third period, a stage eventually recognized for its first major breakthroughs, many of which were witnessed in person by the founder himself, Dr. Eithan Harel, not everything unfolded without setbacks. In fact, one of the most critical and delicate events of that era occurred during the launch of an ambitious mission, whose name, Shemeshiah, taken from an ancient Hebrew word tied to the sun and its transcendence, symbolically reflected both the mystical and scientific nature of the project. The mission had a bold goal: to send a human crew into space to study our solar system's central star directly, an undertaking without precedent in the Foundation's history. Years of preparation led to the development and testing of 6 spacecraft prototypes between 1984 and 1988. Each vessel was meticulously engineered to endure the extreme conditions near the sun and was entrusted to a select team of 5 astronauts, chosen not only for their exceptional expertise, but also for their willingness to engage in a high-risk scientific endeavor. The crew members were Commander Saul Benowitz, a navigation systems specialist, space physician and biologist Dr. Eliezer Corman, telecommunications engineer Rachel Weiselberg, the only woman on the mission, pilot and former military officer David Schechter, and theoretical physicist Aaron Leibman, who was in charge of real-time data analysis. The mission launched on January 5, 1989, from a base whose location remains classified to this day. The initial stages of the journey proceeded without issue, and the preliminary data transmitted to Earth from near the heliospheric boundary even exceeded the expectations of the ground control team. However, as the spacecraft approached a critical solar observation zone, something completely unexpected, and still not fully understood, occurred. A force, the nature of which remains without conclusive explanation, seemed to emanate from the sun itself, suddenly and violently pulling the module toward it. Ground command signals were abruptly jammed or nullified, and communication with the crew was lost exactly 30 minutes before the main incident. The most unsettling part of the case unfolded hours later. Despite the complete loss of contact, a sequence of images from inside the spacecraft, capturing the chaos that erupted prior to the final event, was received on Earth 3 hours after the communication blackout, as if some kind of time distortion or unknown phenomenon had interfered with the transmission. The footage showed the crew in a state of emergency, desperately trying to respond to an anomaly that did not appear to follow any known laws of physics. The nature of the phenomenon remains the subject of intense debate among experts to this day. Despite its tragic outcome and the loss of human life, the incident did not derail the Foundation's momentum or its commitment to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Just a few years later, research centers were already outlining new missions projected for 2002 and 2003, in which the lessons learned would be applied and efforts to re-establish contact with the solar environment would resume under new parameters and with more advanced technologies.
Within the vast and enigmatic universe of the Backrooms, countless spaces abound whose very nature bewilders researchers, not only because of their complexity, but also due to their resistance to systematic classification. These environments, teetering between the perceptible and the elusive, have sparked endless speculation. Yet only a handful of sources, mostly fragmented testimonies and sparse visual material, have managed to offer any concrete insight into their structure or behavior. Most investigations have focused on the so-called lobby, regarded as the starting point or the most accessible level within this dimensional network. However, a far smaller set of efforts dared to push past that threshold, exploring regions where both access and documentation pose qualitatively greater challenges. Between 1994 and 2010, an interdisciplinary group of researchers, hailing from France, the United States, Germany, and Israel, embarked on a series of experiments that broke sharply with conventional approaches. These experiments were carried out at a scientific facility set up near one of the northernmost points of the Antarctic coast, close to stations operated by the Argentine military. The site was chosen both for its extreme isolation and for a set of specific electromagnetic properties detected during earlier reconnaissance missions. Based on partially declassified documents and interviews with some of those involved, it appears the aim of these investigations was not merely to study the phenomenology of the backrooms, but to establish controlled and repeatable access to a particular dimension known as the Shady Gray. This level, whose nature had been cryptically anticipated in the early seminars of psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, was later interpreted as a symbolic manifestation of his concept of the real, a topic that has been explored in depth on this channel. In this framework, the Shady Gray was not seen as a traditional physical place, but rather as a liminal zone between perception and the architecture of thought, a space that defied the classic coordinates of experience. This perspective did not imply a purely subjective reading, but rather entertained the hypothesis that such dimensions might possess an objective existence, even if they remained inaccessible under ordinary states of consciousness or perception. The experimental protocol developed by the international team involved the use of underground facilities built specifically to isolate participants from the known physical environment. Within these spaces, subjects were placed into altered states of consciousness through the intravenous administration of a neuroactive compound. Entry into the dimension, known as the Shady Gray, was only achieved when the subject, under deep hypnosis, was electrically stimulated using devices synchronized with neuromodulatory signals. These explorers, most of them soldiers from the Israeli army, were chosen for their mental resilience and their training in maintaining cognitive control under extreme conditions. One of the most significant operations took place in 2008. During this mission, a small team reached an unprecedented level of immersion, venturing into the innermost and most complex zones of the Shady Gray. Unlike earlier attempts, this mission was not only monitored in real time using neurological instruments and brain activity patterns, but for the first time, the explorers succeeded in capturing images from within the dimension. The photographs, still debated in some circles for their authenticity, remain the most complete visual documentation of this level to date. This collection of images not only records the observed environment, but also suggests a possible structural organization across different tiers, each described in detail alongside the original visual archive. Based on this data, researchers proposed a preliminary segmentation of the Shady Gray into sublevels or zones, each distinguished by its spatial layout, color palette, and psychological impact on the subject. These observations have since provided the foundation for new theories about the internal mechanics of the backrooms, particularly regarding how such dimensions might be shaped by specific mental states or by thresholds of perception that remain unreachable under normal conditions. The so-called Level 0 marks the first and most accessible threshold within the dimension known as the Shady Gray. It is also the most stable and cartographically consistent segment documented to date. This level manifests as a monochromatic forest rendered in a continuous gradient of whites, grays, and blacks. The vegetation, especially the trees, exhibits visual glitches where branches intersect, producing optical distortion patterns that interfere with depth perception and spatial orientation. This phenomenon, recorded multiple times by the neurological sensors worn by explorers, appears to stem from a desynchronization between sensory inputs and the material structure of the environment. This supports the theory that the level is not entirely governed by the usual laws of physics. Access to this level is achieved through a controlled operation conducted from the underground facility in Antarctica. Once the immersion procedure is complete, the subject experiences what is described as an awakening inside an isolated cabin rendered entirely in shades of gray. The structure resembles wood in texture and form, but is composed of a material that does not match any known organic compound. Inside, there are no signs of life or furnishings, save for a single clock. This object has appeared consistently in every expedition and plays a critical role in survival. During the daylight cycle, Level 0 maintains a notable degree of environmental stability. No hostile entities have been reported while the light remains, and the temperature, though slightly cooler than that of typical temperate ecosystems, remains constant. However, this period of safety ends without warning. The transition from light to darkness occurs instantaneously with no perceptible gradient. As soon as the clock strikes 12, the sky shifts abruptly, and the entire landscape is plunged into complete darkness, one that cannot be countered by any natural or artificial source of light. The nighttime phase poses a significant threat to both the physical and mental well-being of the explorer. One of the most peculiar features of this level is the altered state of water. During the daytime, rivers and lakes contain a colorless, slightly viscous liquid with a faint almond scent, closely resembling the natural extract of Prunus dulcis. However, once night falls, this substance undergoes a transformation into what researchers have labeled liquid pain. Ingesting this fluid triggers a chain of severe physiological reactions, beginning with an intense burning sensation in the mouth and esophagus, followed by gastric spasms, sharp abdominal pain, and ultimately prolonged neurological effects, including chronic headaches and intrusive, self-destructive thoughts. To counteract these effects, bioengineers developed a treatment composed of synthetic amino acids and artificial neurotransmitters. While the therapy has shown promise in alleviating the symptoms, it has yet to fully neutralize the long-term consequences of exposure to liquid pain. Due to the extreme danger posed by the nighttime phase, a standardized evacuation protocol has been implemented. All subjects must exit Level 0 before the clock strikes midnight. Follow-up investigations after the initial missions uncovered a transition mechanism to Level 1, an accidental discovery made during the construction of a bunker beneath the original cabin. According to verified reports, digging between 8 and 10 meters into the surrounding terrain triggers a spontaneous dimensional collapse that transports the explorer to the next level. This method has since been adopted as the preferred route of progression, significantly reducing the risk associated with remaining in Level 0 after nightfall. Level 1 takes the form of an unstable mansion, also visible only in the monochromatic spectrum. Upon entry, those subjects rarely recall the transition from the previous level. They find themselves standing in the foyer, where most of the furniture appears warped, and structural elements exhibit glitches, typically associated with digital rendering errors, as if the entire level were procedurally generated by a corrupted system. Touching any of these objects can result in severe physical distortion or even mutilation. Though the layout of the mansion mimics a conventional Western estate, the environment is extremely hostile. The level is inhabited by a single entity known as the landlord, a figure dressed in a suit and hat, always carrying a briefcase. He regards any visitor as a trespasser. If he sees you, he will begin to approach at a steady, deliberate pace. Escape is futile. All exits lock automatically. If he manages to reach you, he typically speaks, often in a calm, cryptic tone, before killing you in some twisted and unpredictable way. While a handful of subjects have reportedly managed to injure or even temporarily kill him, the landlord is notoriously difficult to defeat. He can dodge bullets with unnatural agility and eventually reappears, even after being seemingly destroyed. The only known way to progress to Level 2 is by breaking down a door while surviving an encounter with him, an action that carries an incredibly high risk due to his erratic and lethal behavior. In this sense, progression between levels is governed by a strict and often unforgiving combination of probabilities, where survival hinges not only on luck but on navigating a space that seems purposefully designed to punish every mistake. Level 2 of the Fee The shady gray dimension unfolds immediately after passing through the mansion's door, a liminal structure that acts as both a symbolic and functional threshold between the previous segment and this new environment. It reveals a vast forest blanketed in perpetual snow, which, like the preceding levels, can only be perceived within a strictly monochromatic visual spectrum. This sensory limitation, seemingly imposed by the dimension's own structural logic, not only complicates spatial orientation, but also hinders the detection of physiological signs such as burns, wounds, or dehydration. Yet, in stark contrast to the initial sensation of cold evoked by the snowy landscape, the actual temperature of this level ranges between 100 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit, a dangerously high range for human health. Despite the extreme heat, the snow never melts. This physical paradox has been analyzed extensively but defies explanation through classical thermodynamics. The persistence of the snow's solid state suggests a disconnect between ambient temperature and molecular behavior in this environment, reinforcing the hypothesis that the physical laws here operate under a radically different framework. This anomaly, combined with the monochromatic visual filter, has contributed to many cases of heat stroke or thermal burns going unnoticed until advanced physiological deterioration sets in. Hydration presents another critical challenge on this level. While multiple bodies of water exist, only certain wells have proven to contain almond-scented water safe for consumption. This substance, previously identified in earlier levels, retains its vital function here, serving as a solution capable of temporarily restoring fluid balance and countering hyperthermia. However, access to these wells requires specific terrain knowledge, and their locations have been discovered solely through the sustained efforts of a small group who have established a base of operations deep within the forest. This outpost, inhabited by 3 survivors, represents the first relatively stable human occupation within the dimension. The base was constructed using materials gathered from the immediate surroundings, including heavy, snow-covered branches whose structural strength has been exploited to build minimal shelters. All 3 inhabitants are former explorers of previous levels who have managed to maintain a functional degree of physical and intellectual activity. However, subtle but persistent behavioral changes have been observed among them, speculated to result either from prolonged exposure to the dimensional environment or from interactions with entities present on the level. Among the entities encountered, the only type documented so far are the so-called fallen angels. These humanoid figures bear large black wings spread wide and wear dark blue robes. Their appearance is marked by a series of visible wounds, amputated limbs, bullet holes, deep lacerations that seem to have no physical effect on them but reinforce their image of perpetual vulnerability. These beings have shown themselves to be peaceful and communicative, interacting with humans through an articulated language that appears to grasp contextual references. However, their emotional stability deteriorates sharply when the so-called Tower of Babel is mentioned. In such cases, their behavior quickly turns hostile, even attacking without further provocation. According to their own statements, these topics are directly linked to the structural stability of the dimension and to a supposed metaphysical axis connecting various areas of the universe, accessible only through their unique means of traversal. The only known escape route from this level lies along its shores. Unlike the forested interior, the coastal areas feature bodies of completely still water, with an opaque black hue that stands out even within the dimension's monochromatic filter. It has been determined that navigating these waters leads explorers to a new level, though the nature and characteristics of this next stage remain largely unknown due to the limited number of expeditions completed. To this end, the 3 survivors of the outpost have spent several years building small, rudimentary boats, using both materials gathered from the forest and remnants of unidentified structures found along the coastline. Their progress has been partially documented through irregular transmissions, which suggest ongoing operations within the level, albeit under extremely precarious conditions. Level 3 is one of the strangest sublevels within this dimension. Like all levels here, it manifests as a monochromatic ocean, which some studies suggest may have boundaries shaped by a topological expansion closely resembling a Möbius strip. The ocean's water is toxic and unsuitable for contact or consumption, composed of a hazardous mix of distilled water, mercury, and motor oil. Leaked files mention that some explorers reported seeing floating clocks, but this information remains unconfirmed as other reports contradict those claims. This discrepancy may be linked to the proximity of the next level, which is triggered by altered emotional states, potentially explaining those clock-related hallucinations. Explorers and research centers have attempted to investigate the ocean floor using drones, but nothing unusual has been found beyond what would be expected in a conventional ocean, except that complex marine life is virtually non-existent. Still, the possibility of unknown life forms cannot be entirely ruled out, although the extreme chemical conditions make this unlikely. These factors have led some to speculate that this level is little more than an enormous industrial waste pool, and it may even be part of the next level given the total sterility of its environment. Level 4 is the last known stable sublevel within the dimension and can supposedly only be accessed by touching the liquid from the previous level's ocean and applying it to the arms and face. However, visual records contradict this, suggesting instead that it may be an altered state of consciousness causing explorers to exhibit erratic behavior. In this scenario, these explorers begin coating themselves with the substance, believing it will transport them, but in reality, it is just a mental effect that leads them into a level existing deep within the subconscious. Reports describe that upon entering this fourth level, the explorer falls from their boat directly into a river running through a dark, baroque distorted city that appears to extend toward the horizon within a Möbius-like logic. The city's aesthetic is decayed and maintains the characteristic monochromatic coloration. The river water has been verified safe to the touch, but drinking it causes intense vomiting and diarrhea. This effect has been debated as potentially another distortion of the explorer's consciousness, who may physically exist in an intermediate plane between this and the previous level. The city streets are rife with danger. Faceless humanoids dressed like common criminals brutally assault visitors, stripping them of everything they have, even sentimental items. Surprisingly, these creatures can be pacified if offered almond-scented water. Their modes of attack reportedly vary widely and are closely linked to the deepest fears and traumatic experiences of the explorers. Besides these threats, the level is subject to frequent natural disasters, storms, tornadoes, acid rain, and extreme temperature shifts. Buildings are locked but can be forced open, though lethal entities are said to lurk inside. No explorer has returned alive after entering these structures. The level is extremely hostile, dark, and has no known exit, except for a random chance to fall through the ground into an even deeper zone, where explorers' bodies, the physical substrate of their beings, remain suspended in a coma-like state, recoverable only after months of rehabilitation and medical treatment following the exploration. Known as Lost Hope, this level represents the most extreme breaking point within the dimension explored under the Shady Gray Project. Its appearance marks a complete collapse of any physical, perceptual, or cognitive stability observed in previous levels. This space is barely documented, with all available reports describing its lethality as absolute. Unlike earlier levels, where minimal safety routines or adaptation strategies could be established, Lost Hope is an environment in which the mere presence of an individual seems incompatible with biological or psychological continuity. For this reason, exploration has been limited exclusively to subjects who signed a full waiver, deliberately foregoing the neuroprotective pharmaceutical protocols normally administered during the initial phases of the journey. Entry into this level occurs only when the explorer's mental state deteriorates to the point of inevitable clinical coma. There is no clear physical threshold or warning signs indicating the transition. Essentially, it is a silent descent into a space where consciousness operates at a frequency completely disconnected from any human reference. The documented survival rate is below 1%, and to date, only 2 verified cases exist of subjects returning to full consciousness. Both occurred in 2008 and have been extensively analyzed through neurological, psychiatric, and biochemical studies at highly specialized institutions. The 2 individuals who returned described an environment of unstable geometry whose visual structure was paradoxical. The walls, though solid to both sight and touch, exhibited a wavering behavior, as if vibrating at an irregular frequency that disrupted spatial orientation. This phenomenon induced a constant sensation of staggering comparable to vertigo with no anatomical origin. The cognitive disorientation caused by this oscillation appears to stem not only from the physical environment but also from a radical alteration in how the brain processes space, time, and matter. Both explorers who survived lost hope were transferred to maximum security psychiatric facilities in the state of California, where they remained under constant surveillance. During the 3 years following their return, they developed chronic dissociative disorders, episodic amnesia, and profound emotional numbness, accompanied by a total refusal of human interaction. Their written and spoken records were preserved but gradually became incoherent, filled with metaphysical references, lacking any functional linguistic correlation. Both individuals died 3 years after their return, under clinical circumstances that could not be linked to known diseases. The ultimate cause was classified as total neurological deterioration without any apparent organic origin. The Eithan Harel Foundation. Since its inception, some of these cases involve the appearance of unusual biological entities whose morphology and behavior defy any existing classification within traditional zoology. In several of these encounters, the specimens displayed traits that pose potential threats not only to public health but also to ecological stability. Such discoveries have compelled the Foundation not only to develop strict isolation protocols, but also to maintain facilities dedicated exclusively to the permanent containment of these creatures or entities, some of which cannot be adequately described using current scientific parameters. Beyond its work with anomalous lifeforms, the Foundation has maintained a sustained interest in certain structures and areas of uncertain access, internally referred to as the other sides, and more popularly known online as the Backrooms. These regions, whose nature remains unclear and whose space-time conditions are variable, have been the subject of covert expeditions across different points of the globe, where the existence of entry points or portals is presumed. To that end, specially trained agents have been deployed under strict confidentiality, tasked with locating, documenting, and, in some cases, sealing off such entrances if deemed hazardous. During one of these operations, the Foundation received reports in 1991 from Eastern Russia. The documents described the presence of a network of underground galleries, clearly artificial in appearance, located in a remote region of Siberia. The coordinates pointed to an isolated area in the Republic of Sakha, more than 100 kilometers north of the town of Mirny. The site, known for its harsh climate and minimal human activity, had no recorded history of state-run mining exploration, let alone private projects of such magnitude. However, the described entrances exhibited a remarkable degree of technical consistency, rectilinear forms, regular metal reinforcements, and unmistakable signs of heavy machinery use, all of which seemed highly improbable given the area's poor mineral yield and the lack of geological records that would justify such excavation. Given the magnitude and singular nature of the discovery, the Foundation decided to dispatch a full team for an on-site inspection. What made this case truly exceptional was the personal involvement of Eithan Harel, founder and chief executive officer of the organization, who rarely took part in field operations. This would also be the final mission he joined before his passing. The deployed team documented the environment with meticulous care. Maps were drawn, photographic records were taken, and a wide array of measurements was conducted. The entrances, scattered across a perimeter spanning several kilometers, appeared to follow no discernible pattern. After several days of evaluation and topographic analysis, the Foundation team concluded that documentation alone would not suffice. It was imperative to secure the entry zones against any unpredictable shifts in the surrounding environment. To that end, they opted to deploy a technology that until then had only been tested in controlled conditions: quantum isolation prototypes. These devices were designed to contain space-time fluctuations and maintain a relative coherence between the dimensional flow observed on site and Earth standard physical synchronization. Simply put, the goal was to prevent the site's natural distortions from affecting both time perception and material stability inside and outside the complex. Over the course of 3 uninterrupted months, installation work on these systems continued. Engineers, physicists, and specially trained technicians collaborated to precisely integrate the portals into the pre-existing access structures. The devices were subjected to extensive testing under strict protocols developed by the Foundation's technical division, ensuring full functionality before any attempt at prolonged entry. Only after these phases were successfully completed was systematic exploration authorized, which began in January of 1992. The initial records described an underground network of remarkable complexity, far exceeding original expectations. Early estimates indicated that the passageways extended in a radius of at least 5 kilometers, forming an intricate labyrinth of branches, towering chambers, and corridors seemingly designed to accommodate heavy machinery or the transport of materials. Despite some areas showing signs of corrosion due to moisture and the passage of time, the overall structure reflected a clear architectural logic consistent with modern mining facilities, complete with metal supports and structural reinforcements that pointed to a specific functional purpose. As the explorers pushed deeper into the system, they began to uncover remnants of drainage systems, sealed pipelines, and transport channels likely intended for liquid or semi-liquid industrial substances. The presence of such infrastructure strongly suggested long-term planning in the construction, a fact that clashed violently with the complete absence of any reference to it in public or private records. More disturbing was the gradual discovery of abandoned mechanical devices coated in rust and dust whose functions were difficult to determine. Some bore a resemblance to outdated drilling or mineral processing equipment, but none could be conclusively identified. Unable to trace the origin of these structures through conventional means, the Foundation opted for a direct test. A series of vertical shafts would be excavated over critical points in the network based on internal cartography gathered by the exploration teams. Dynamite was used to accelerate the opening process, and the operation was closely monitored using vibration sensors and geophysical instruments. However, the results proved baffling. None of the detonations led to access points for the underground chambers. Instead, each blast yielded nothing more than a large crater that opened into nothing beyond the immediate blast zone itself. Having concluded that the underground network under investigation did not correspond to any conventional physical space and likely belonged to some form of alternate plane or parallel dimension, the Foundation resolved to continue its deep-level explorations. Although the structure did not extend more than 10 meters below the Earth's surface, according to measurements taken both inside and outside the complex, the passageways appeared to stretch indefinitely within the internal plane, branching out as if the system were in a state of constant reconfiguration. It was during this phase that the team encountered a phenomenon that further complicated the situation. Numerous corridors began to exhibit an organic, viscous substance coating the walls, ceilings, and in some cases, the floors. The mucus-like material had a bulbous texture and ranged in color from reddish to yellowish tones. It expanded silently, showing no internal pulsations. To the touch, it was warm, soft, and slightly damp, yet it emitted no odor and showed no signs of autonomous activity. Despite its unsettling appearance, preliminary tests ruled out any immediate toxicity from brief contact or low-level inhalation. Nevertheless, warnings were issued regarding direct handling, and personnel were ordered to minimize time spent in affected areas. The emergence of this substance coincided with a series of disappearances that disrupted the continuity of the project. In total, 6 agents lost contact with the surface team while exploring different sections covered in the mucus. Communications failed suddenly, without prior warning or signs of interference. The tracking devices embedded in their suits ceased transmitting entirely, as if the agents had vanished from the physical realm. There were no signs of struggle, no retreating footprints, and no indicators of disorientation. They simply disappeared from the monitoring system. In light of the lack of conclusive results and the growing risk to personnel, the Foundation ordered the complete shutdown of the complex. All entrances were sealed using composite materials and reinforced with next-generation containment rings, while remote surveillance was implemented around the clock. The formal recommendation was to keep the site closed indefinitely, only to be reopened under extraordinary circumstances, and to maintain continuous monitoring of geospatial activity in the area. Despite these measures, many within the organization expressed doubts about the true nature of the phenomenon and the effectiveness of the sealing, particularly after the incident reported in 1994. That year, a man was found wandering along a secondary highway in the Arizona desert, visibly dehydrated and disoriented. After being admitted to a rural hospital, authorities discovered inconsistencies in his identification and contacted the Foundation upon finding a partially destroyed badge on his clothing, one that belonged to an agent who had gone missing during the mission in Siberia. When questioned by authorized personnel, the man claimed to have escaped the tunnel network after discovering a passage that, in his words, opened without warning in a wall covered in mucus. Crossing through it, he said, left him in the middle of the night under a cloudless sky, in a heat that didn't belong to any forest. Within the vast and unsettling universe of the Backrooms, the boundary between the imagined and the possible has begun to blur in increasingly disturbing ways. What initially seemed like a digital folklore creation, a collage of endless hallways, windowless rooms bathed in fluorescent light devoid of furniture, quickly evolved into a kind of modern myth, fueled by the viral spread of social media and internet forums. These spaces, now widely known as liminal spaces, were rapidly embraced by an online community that turned them into a shared visual language. Far from being mere products of overstimulated imaginations or collaborative fiction games, some accounts have begun to incorporate documentary elements that suggest something deeper and possibly real might be unfolding. At the heart of this apparent convergence between reality and anomaly lies the Eithan Harel Foundation for Transdimensional Studies. Based in Tel Aviv, this institution has operated for decades under a low profile, maintaining a rigorous research agenda focused on phenomena that involve breaks or fractures in the conventional structure of space and time. Named in honor of Dr. Eithan Harel, a theoretical physicist and pioneer in the exploration of nonlinear dimensional models, the Foundation has carried out numerous confidential projects, most of them centered on the manipulation of perceptual thresholds and access to alternate planes of existence. The origins of this experiment trace back to 1994, when a team made up of specialists in quantum physics, along with technical staff and military units assigned for logistical support, began working on the development of devices capable of artificially inducing localized tears in the fabric of reality. These early trials, later documented in internal reports, faced numerous failures and unrepeatable phenomena. However, by the end of that same year, the team succeeded in stabilizing a functional prototype. By early 1995, the Foundation had 2 operational portals installed in underground chambers at its main facility, from which the first controlled incursion was launched into a dimension that until then had existed only in theory. Dr. Harel, who would pass away just a few months after the experiment, never lived to see the full systematization of its results. Nevertheless, the findings from the explorations into these alternate spaces have emerged as some of the most credible evidence supporting the existence of the so-called backrooms. It was in the year 1995 that a team first entered what has come to be known as Level 9, referred to as the Dark Suburbs. Level 9 is an expansive and winding network of paved streets, roads, and American-style suburban homes, replicating a modern neighborhood setting. There is no natural light in this level, as it exists in a state of perpetual night. Moreover, the few artificial light sources scattered throughout rarely function properly, and their placement follows no discernible logic. Light seems to emanate from invisible origins, illuminating some areas without any identifiable source. A dense fog blankets the entire level, further reducing visibility to a range of 20 meters or less. Combined with frequent strong winds and the occasional storm, the average temperature hovers around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, although it often dips below the freezing point. This makes the climate of Level 9 a significant challenge for anyone wandering its streets. The streets and sidewalks are in a state of advanced decay, exposing the barren earth beneath, often overrun with moss and weeds. In some areas, sidewalks and walking paths are entirely absent, leaving mud-covered ground as the only option for travel on foot. Abandoned vehicles are scattered along the roads, though they are in severe disrepair, broken down, rusted, and entirely unusable. Due to the overall poor condition of the buildings in this level, particularly those seemingly designed for the transmission of data and power, real-time communication with the outside world is currently impossible. However, telecommunications antennas have been spotted atop several structures, suggesting that limited interpersonal contact may still be possible using devices that don't rely on external networks, such as short-range radios or transceivers. Entities within Level 9 tend to avoid well-lit areas, possibly as a form of self-preservation. For this reason, they are usually found lurking in the most neglected zones, where light is rare, lying in wait for unsuspecting prey. The most common structures in the level are the numerous houses scattered throughout, each in varying stages of decay. Most of them resemble typical American suburban homes, which raises questions, particularly given that the levels do not appear to align geographically with the point of entry. This architectural consistency suggests a more complex spatial logic at play. Many buildings show significant structural damage caused by various factors. Small objects carried by the strong winds eventually shatter windows over time, while more powerful entities are capable of breaking down doors and damaging interiors. Furniture found inside these houses is often worn out, broken, or entirely destroyed, while some structures are completely empty. As a result, locating useful items within these dwellings is extremely difficult. Occasionally, one might come across usable supplies in some buildings, but the chances are minimal. Power stations are far less common than residential structures and tend to appear only in the deeper regions of the level, accessible only after extended exploration. Most of their components are worn down by time, creating a stark contrast with the surrounding buildings. As their deteriorated state suggests, these machines frequently malfunction or fail to operate altogether, often producing barely enough electricity to power structures within the level, or the power lines that run along its empty streets. Despite the environment's potential hostility, records show that under controlled conditions and with strict light discipline protocols, it is possible to explore this level without immediately triggering hostile manifestations. The team from 1995, fully aware of the inherent risks involved in any interaction with non-conventional dimensions, adhered to a policy of minimal environmental interference. This involved the complete suppression of artificial light sources, relying instead on adaptive vision sensors and infrared technology to conduct the majority of observations. Thanks to this cautious approach, no direct encounters with aggressive entities occurred for most of the operation, save for one notable exception. The appearance of a specimen later identified as a mangled, which showed clear signs of injury. This entity approached one of the team members in an erratic, disoriented manner and appeared to be suffering from severe structural degradation, likely caused by the unstable conditions of the surrounding environment. Reports described the creature as massive in scale, with disproportionately long limbs reminiscent of an arachnid and a head bearing vaguely human features, though so distorted as to be nearly unrecognizable. It was, by all accounts, an extraordinarily fortunate encounter. In its weakened state, the creature displayed none of the hostile behavior that has been documented in other levels or during later incidents. According to descriptions compiled in the years that followed, mangled specimens can grow to heights exceeding 30 feet and exhibit immediate aggression, capable of attacking without direct provocation if detected by visual or auditory means. Typically, such entities do not appear frequently or in large numbers. They tend to manifest alone, moving through overgrown vegetation or dragging themselves across the decaying structures of the level, most often along the facades and rooftops of the abandoned homes. Their presence seems tied to the occurrence of a yet unidentified phenomenon, one that defies current understanding in both physical and temporal terms, a kind of internal environmental event that allows their brief emergence. In this particular case, the injured specimen may have been forced out of its dormant zone by the same instabilities that, according to experts from the Eithan Harel Foundation, were compromising the integrity of the level itself. The theory of progressive dimensional degradation began gaining traction after the first 10 hours of the team's presence within the level. Sensors and readings transmitted through the portal began to register a series of anomalies, changes in the air's chemical composition, molecular irregularities in collected objects, and disruptions in internal gravitational parameters. By hour 13, the Foundation's technical report suggested the environment had initiated what appeared to be a defensive or self-regulating mechanism, one that gradually broke down any foreign presence, including inanimate matter. This hypothesis was further supported when retrieved samples of sediment, structural fragments, and debris from the level, once secured and transferred to a controlled laboratory setting, began to spontaneously disintegrate. The materials either evaporated or collapsed at a subatomic level, leaving no trace behind. This behavior directly contradicted established physical laws regarding the conservation of matter. Based on these findings, the Eithan Harel Foundation scheduled new incursions for the years 1997 and 1998, this time deploying more advanced teams and a refined monitoring protocol. However, to this day, no official documentation or verifiable material from these alleged missions has surfaced. The complete absence of follow-up information has fueled a surge of unverified theories, most of which circulate exclusively within digital communities and online forums focused on the paranormal and conspiracy topics. As a result, everything related to developments after 1995 remains shrouded in ambiguity and uncertainty that has only served to deepen the mythological status of the phenomenon within internet culture. From the already well-documented Eithan Harel Foundation, frequently discussed in earlier installments on this channel, it is known that between May and September of 2002, a special delegation was sent to the city of Hirosaki, located in the northern part of Japan's main island. The mission was prompted by a wave of reports circulating through local media and informal online forums concerning the disappearance of homeless individuals and a number of political refugees. At first, the most plausible theories pointed to the involvement of organized crime networks, possibly linked to the Yakuza, given the profile of the victims and the nature of the region. However, over time, alternative explanations began to surface, connecting these events to the alleged atrocities committed by the Yanagiwara couple, whose background has already been explored in depth on this channel. What ultimately drew the Foundation's attention wasn't the official police reports, but a series of amateur video recordings made by university students from the area. These videos referenced an old abandoned factory at the foot of Mount Iwaki, a site already steeped in local lore and whispered stories of unknown origin. According to the first reports filed by the Aomori Prefectural Police, unmistakable signs of ritual activity had been found around the factory grounds. Among the items discovered were human remains, fragments of symbols drawn with organic materials, and makeshift structures suggesting some kind of undocumented ceremony. During the inspection of the site by local authorities, 3 officers went missing. Their bodies were never recovered, and not a single trace of them has surfaced since. These events, taken together, triggered significant alarm within the Foundation, enough to raise the possibility that they were dealing with one of those unstable access zones believed to lead to alternate dimensions. Specifically, there was speculation about a potential connection to anomalous environments, similar to those that over time would shape the popular imagination around what are now widely known in contemporary digital culture as the Backrooms. After carefully assessing the risk variables, the decision was made to isolate the entire area, both the factory grounds and a broad surrounding perimeter, including sections of the volcanic massif of Mount Iwaki. The operation was far from superficial. Teams of geologists and applied physicists, working under the supervision of the Harel Foundation, began an intensive monitoring effort focused on the terrain's activity, particularly the volcanic subsoil. The findings, eventually leaked by third parties, revealed the presence of an extremely unstable geomagnetic pattern concentrated in a specific region of the massif. This behavior did not align with standard volcanic activity, nor did it point to any imminent eruption. Rather, it suggested the presence of a phenomenon that was distorting the magnetic field in irregular ways, producing intermittent pulses that could not be replicated under laboratory conditions. However, due to the technological limitations of the time and the potential risk of triggering a chain reaction by interfering with the volcano, no drilling or direct manipulation of the massif was attempted. Instead, the discovery was documented as a high-interest anomaly in the Foundation's internal reports. Once the operational base was established on the outskirts of Hirosaki, the Foundation's team spent the following months conducting a systematic and prolonged inspection of the factory's interior. Despite strong electromagnetic interference detected in multiple sections of the building, which severely hindered the use of conventional measurement, navigation, and communication equipment, the team managed to partially map the structure and identify what appeared to be a pattern of space-time behavior. By that point, the Foundation had already been secretly developing experimental technologies designed to temporarily stabilize access points to dimensionally unstable zones. These devices, built specifically to counter interference and preserve structural cohesion within altered environments, made it possible to establish a controlled entry point inside the factory. It was there that researchers were able to confirm, through direct recordings, the existence of a fracture in the space-time continuum. This rupture was neither constant nor uniform, but it displayed cycles of expansion and contraction that coincided with peaks in geomagnetic activity recorded at the volcano. Preliminary analyses suggested that the dimensional breach operated like a one-way valve, or at least a semi-permeable threshold, allowing selective passage into spatial configurations that did not match any known location within reality. This dimension presents itself as a structurally simple environment made up of a vast network of interconnected warehouses. The floors and walls are primarily composed of exposed concrete, often with visible rebar, suggesting either an unfinished construction or long-term neglect. Scattered throughout these spaces are work tools, industrial machinery like hand trucks and forklifts, and various types of supply crates seemingly placed at random yet strategic points across the level. Altogether, it evokes the impression of a facility once used for logistical or industrial operations, now abandoned without any clear rationale. One consistent feature of this dimension is the presence of shallow puddles of ordinary water spread across nearly its entire expanse. These puddles have no identifiable source, yet maintain a perpetual cycle of evaporation and condensation that gives rise to a dense, lingering fog. This mist blankets large portions of the environment, functioning as a permanent atmospheric condition, reducing visibility and contributing to a persistent sense of ambient dampness. Remarkably, despite the ongoing evaporation, the water levels in the puddles never appear to diminish, hinting at a self-sustaining process that defies conventional explanation. Unlike the more widely known dimension that gave rise to the Backrooms phenomenon, this one features functional utilities, both electricity and running water, which drastically alter the survival conditions for anyone residing within it. This basic infrastructure makes it possible for explorers to remain alive for extended periods, provided they follow careful survival protocols. Due to the relative accessibility of this plane, Foundation explorers eventually organized into small cooperative groups with minimal structural hierarchies, significantly improving their chances of avoiding accidental disorientation or isolation. Supply crates are among the most valuable resources found within this dimension. Their distribution appears to follow no discernible pattern, and their contents vary widely. Some crates contain essential survival items, non-perishable food, bottled drinks, almond water, royal rations, batteries, basic tools, flashlights, warm clothing, waterproof tarps, and first aid kits. Most of these items are found in poor external condition, often stored in rooms filled with mud and an unnaturally high level of humidity. However, it's also common to find unusual or seemingly useless objects, such as automotive parts, entire boxes of pens, unmarked syringes, loose papers, coins from various eras and regions, and other items with no obvious purpose. More concerning are crates that contain substances dangerous to human health, including cashew water and liquid pain, materials whose handling poses a direct threat to the safety of anyone who encounters them. For this reason, every crate must be approached with extreme caution, as each one represents both a potential opportunity and a significant risk, particularly if removed from this dimension and brought back into reality. One of the most dangerous phenomena documented in this dimension is the random occurrence of blackouts. These power outages affect vast areas, sometimes up to 12 square miles, and are consistently followed by increased activity from hostile entities. These entities exploit the darkness to move more freely, often appearing alone or in coordinated groups, drastically raising the threat level. The duration of these blackouts is unpredictable. Some last only a few hours, while others persist for days or even weeks, rendering the affected area's lighting infrastructure completely inoperable. Under such conditions, carrying flashlights or other autonomous light sources becomes absolutely essential, not only for navigation. The conclusions of the investigation, detailed in the classified documents of the Eithan Harel Foundation, indicated that the phenomenon observed at the Hirosaki factory shared fundamental similarities with the events that occurred during the exploration of the tunnels in Siberia. According to these reports, it was believed that the individuals who vanished inside the factory were not eliminated in a conventional physical sense, but were most likely transported beyond the frame of reference of our known reality. The most consistent hypotheses pointed to the possibility of displacements to other regions of the planet, remote places with no apparent direct connection, or even to coordinates entirely disconnected from the space-time structure of our observable universe. Among the scenarios considered, analysts strongly supported the likelihood that those affected may have been pushed into divergent timelines, most frequently oriented toward the future. However, there were also theoretical indicators suggesting the possibility of travel into the past, albeit to a lesser extent. In either case, the prevailing consensus was that the transition would have been physically and mentally catastrophic, resulting in immediate death for most, due to the human body's inability to adapt to the conditions of these foreign coordinates caused by the distortion of structural tissue. Still, at the margins of these reports, there were references to certain anomalous historical episodes, incidents in which testimonies and descriptions surfaced that could be interpreted as evidence of people appearing outside their time or place. These accounts led some Foundation researchers to consider the remote possibility that a small number of individuals may have survived the dimensional transit. Though ultimately unverifiable, these cases remain as footnotes within the investigation, sustaining the faint possibility that a few of the disappeared may have endured the irreversible journey into the past.